It's a good
You
time.
did a great job. You did. It's good when you have somebody who feels comfortable, talking about what they do, and you can just ask them a question and let them go. That was perfect. You did a great job. It was so much fun.
Well, I mentioned about I mentioned about teaching
Yeah.
and being in front of a class, and that just I learned to just completely turn on when there's people in front of me, and it was this facility that happened inside me that I don't know where it came from. That I'd be working to a bunch of PowerPoint slides with material on them, and all of a sudden, the back of my mind would come up with an idea of how to illustrate that particular concept with something from my own past, some project I'd worked on, something I'd heard of, and I would just launch into doing it. And I would watch the lights come on in the eyes in front of me in the classroom. And it was marvelous to do that. I thoroughly enjoyed doing it.
A good teacher is such a rare thing. Not to disparage any teachers, because I respect anybody who takes on that very noble profession, but a truly great teacher who can captivate the class and really get their minds going. That's such a special thing, man. Like I remember specifically like the one teacher that was like that for me. It was in
Mm-hmm.
seventh grade. Mr. Thompson. He was our history teacher, but he was one of these people that just he was a jack of all trades, and he knew so much about everything. And he spoke 7 different languages, and he had been all over the world, all that kind of stuff. And he was our history teacher, and I used to love he used to love Michael Crichton novels at the same time that I was reading everything Michael Crichton had ever put out. I was obsessed with Michael Crichton novels, in 7th grade. So I would stay after class and talk to him for hours about it, and argue with him about how to pronounce Crichton. He was right. I had to I had to learn how to say it properly. But yeah, man, a good teacher, that's everything to a young
Yeah,
mind. I respect the hell out of that.
yeah. There was so. In any case, I thoroughly enjoy doing that, and I still do it. And you know what? I get in front of people, I turn on,
Yeah,
and and I love doing it, and people respond to it as well. I,
sure.
I cannot count the number of times that somebody came up to me after a class and said, this was the best class I've ever had.
Hmm.
And you hear that once and it fills your heart. And I heard that dozens of times, dozens of times.
That's fantastic, man. And
Yeah.
and I can see it. Like I said earlier, the way that you're able to carry on the conversation and spin a yarn, as you say, to tell us the story of all these different aspects of your life. It was that was a really great episode to end on. I'm really happy with it. I gotta tell you, because again, there's a lot going on there. You've got your Navy pilot stuff. The engineer time in your life is really fascinating as well. What's something that like really like sticks to you to this day about that time in particular, the engineering team and what you guys were working on? Because you ended up writing a novel inspired by it, so obviously there's something there.
Well, it is. What strikes me the most about that time and about that work that I did was the complexity, the difficulty of making it all fit together. Because my job as a lead systems engineer was to coordinate the efforts of a team of engineers. Now, what does that mean? I mean, imagine something like an automobile.
Mm,
I didn't design automobiles, but it's a good example. Okay. Imagine something like an automobile. And how many engineers does it take to design an automobile? You sit in your car and you look around, and there's a steering wheel in front of you, and there's a little turn signal indicator over here, and there's a lever to change gears, and there's a pedal down there. Every one of those objects was designed by an engineer.
mm,
And then behind those objects, there's a bunch of software inside that dashboard that controls the engine, that controls the connections. All of that software was written by engineers. And so my job was to take a team of anywhere from 5 to 50 engineers and get them to work on things that would all fit together at the end.
And that's the key, right? That not only does the thing have to work, but it has to work in concert with everything else.
That's right.
There has to be a harmony between all of these moving
And
parts.
therein lies the difficulty today, because we have plugged things together so much. I spent the last 10 years of my engineering career working internationally to help research into complexity and what we called systems of systems. Things like law enforcement.
Okay.
In law enforcement, they use a lot of systems. They have radios, they have weapons, they have intel equipment that they use to learn things. They've got records keeping equipment. And all of those systems were designed and built individually to do that job. But then with today's internet, they take all of those systems and they plug them together. And they expect them to work with each other. And they were never designed to do that.
Yeah, all the forensic stuff that they gotta use to
Right.
get the science part, like, yeah, it's like
And
a
so-
lot of these different systems all working together.
And so a forensic scientist gathers the information that he's gathered from evidence, and he puts it into some sort of a spreadsheet, and he hands that spreadsheet off to a detective, and the detective is working with that information plus information from a lot of other sources, and all of that information is in different formats. And the way that the forensic technologist entered something into the spreadsheet might make a huge difference in the way that data is perceived when it's integrated with the rest of the data. And yet there was nothing in the design of that forensic technician's work
Yeah.
to tell him that. And so I worked in, for instance, transportation. And how do you connect automobiles with highways? Tesla and their problem with self-driving cars, and now you take that with a toll highway, and the toll highway is pulling information from the cars to coordinate the speeds of flow on the highway. And all of that information is also being sent over to law enforcement to look for speeders and to look for things that are going wrong. And all of these systems were never designed to work that way, but we plug them together and we expect them to.
What's really crazy is when you start thinking about how each individual precinct, city, state handles their law enforcement versus others, and then when they have to work together, when a case crosses state lines or crosses county lines, and two different precincts have to solve the same murder or whatever crime, and they are not working on even similar systems, let alone the same one, like they're not even similar, and they have to translate all this. Like, I think back to Zodiac and that whole case, and how there was all these counties involved, and none of them were talking to each other. None of them knew that it was, and would it have gone on as long as it did if they had all worked together, if they were on the same system, if they were able to communicate more effectively? It's a problem, man. It's a problem.
And so back to my job and the research that I was doing. Many of those systems engineers are first and foremost engineers. And engineers tend, as a class, to be rather rigid in their thinking. They like things to be ordered. It's just what makes them be an engineer in the first place. And I am an engineer.
Ones and zeros, right? Like it's
Right.
gotta work.
I am an engineer, but I also started out as a naval officer, and I got a lot of experience in leadership and connectivity of people. And so that kind of, when I got into engineering, I was rising above that idea of everything is in process.
There's probably also an element of thinking on your feet, thinking outside the box, making split-second decisions that comes from being something like a pilot that would probably make you a very different engineer from other engineers. You know what I mean?
And I saw it in the interactions that I have, because some of my well-respected friends in the systems engineering field, when we started dealing with complexity and we started saying, well, these systems of systems are different than ordinary systems, I heard several of them say emphatically, no, they're not. We already know how to build a system. You build a system by first defining what the system needs to do, and then you add to that a set of technical requirements that define what that thing is, and then you create an architecture to those technical requirements, and then you go build the thing to that architecture. And they said, we know how to do that. If we just do that with these bigger systems, it'll work. And I couldn't get them to understand that it doesn't work.
Yeah. There's just something else going on here that you have to factor in. It's not going to fit in your little box like that.
And working with some other free-thinking people, we began to create models. And instead of being a forward flow, step A, step B, step C, they were more iterative in their process, where you go forward and you loop back, and you go forward and you loop back, because you have to be adaptive to the things you discover as the development goes on. Now, all of this stuff, does it go into my writing? Yes. In the tail end of Not Like Us, Jake and Sophia are in charge of a development of this device, this system that's going to help people understand each other emotionally. And they go through a system integration cycle on that device, and everything that they try breaks. And they try something and it doesn't work, and they try something else and it doesn't work, and they've got a time deadline to get it done before the international negotiations that are going to create the global war.
You know, you kind of blew my mind a little bit just now, because the idea that the machine that's going to help us understand each other is not going to help us with language barriers or data. It's going to help us with emotion. It's going to help us understand each other's emotions. It's so interesting to me that that's the answer, right? If we were all more empathetic, if we could feel what others feel and realize that we're all feeling the same things and we're all alike, how much more connected would we be? Here we are, you know, trying to connect each other with technology, as far as like, oh, FaceTime, I can talk to somebody. Oh, I can send a file. Oh, I can, you know, stitch stuff together on TikTok or whatever. All of that is well and good, but where's the emotional connection? Without that, there's no empathy. Without the empathy, we can't relate to each other. That's so fascinating to me.
Well, you've picked up on it immediately, and that's really
intense.
Technology. I call that technology in this book, I call it the transpath. Transpath provides an empathetic connection between people, so that I can feel your feelings and you can feel my feelings. And imagine what would happen if you're in an international negotiation between Iran and Israel, and you say something and you immediately feel the reaction from the other side of the table. Feel the emotional reaction from the other side of the table. Imagine yourself backpedaling immediately and saying, wait a second, that's not
what I meant. Hold on. Let me rephrase.
Let's go back and try that again until we understand each other.
Yeah. And
you
know, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with write what you know, because, you know, for my book, for example, you know, there's a crime thriller element to it. Like I'm not a detective. I've, you know, never been involved in any murder case or anything like that. I'm not writing what I know in there, but where I do put in what I know is into the characters, into their backstories, into their you know, the things that make them human, because that's what I can bring to. That's where I can find empathy and relation. So, for example, you know, something traumatic that happened to my wife in her youth is something that I gave to one of my characters as a backstory to them, and I'm trying to work things out with that character in her journey, and trying to be true to my wife's experiences in that, because that's something that I know. Another main character is a Latin character, a Latino character. I gave him a younger sister. I know I have a younger sister. I know what it's like to have that particular kind of sibling relationship, and I can write it well because I've lived it and I know what I'm talking about. And so it's all in an effort to empathetically reach people to well, here's something that you can relate to because I can relate to it. I know I can relate to it. So hopefully somebody else can relate to it as well when they read it.
And that's, you asked me in the last session about a powerful hack, powerful tool, and I mentioned Heart's Desire from Wolf Moon, and that's exactly what that's about. It's about gaining that empathetic connection with the reader, so that the reader really understands your character and their heart. What is it they're after?
That's awesome.
Yeah. Marvelous stuff. This writing is, it fills me. It fills me with creative ideas that I've thoroughly enjoyed.
Mm,
Continue to enjoy every time I
yeah.
sit in front of the laptop.
Same. I love it. The discovery of these things as you're the one creating them. It's kind of a wild concept. I equate it to dreaming. Dreaming creates this perfect loop of creation and discovery, inspiration and discovery, and you just kind of keep, creating this dream as you are discovering it. It's a weird thing, and that's how I feel, especially when I'm, as they say, pantsing things, where I'm just, writing by the seat of my pants, just letting it come out. Um, that's what it feels like. It just feels like discovering something that I'm creating, and that's
Hmm.
it's a strange, beautiful thing, I think.
Hmm. And it's, where do we go with? I don't know how much outlining you do. I start with the main plot of a story of the novel, and then I generally create two or three other subsidiary plots that are going to interact with the main plot, and I know where they're all headed to a particular climax out here.
Mm,
But then when I break them down into a chapter structure, I might have 4 or 5 bullets for the chapter.
mm,
This is what's going to happen in this chapter. That's it. 4 or 5 bullets. And I've got to expand that into 2,500 words. And that's where the major creativity really happens, because I was just doing this yesterday. I was creating a scene in which a relatively minor character who's a young college student has just witnessed this horrible incident
mm,
that leads to what may be a holy war. And he's been asked to present his eyewitness account to the leading council of the country. They don't have a
mm.
president, they have a council, a series of ministers. And and so I started with this young man walking into the government building with his butterflies in his stomach. He's got to go present to the president. Only it's not the
Yeah,
president, it's the equivalent in
the
that
council.
country.
Yeah.
And and it just 1,500 words later, I had kind of skimmed through his presentation,
Mm,
and I looked at it and I said, "Wow, how did that happen?" This was what I really did in those 1,500 words was expand on his character.
mm.
Say, what's he like? What's he doing in this situation, and how does he handle the situation? And where's he going to go next?
Yeah. Well, he enters the building with butterflies in his stomach, right? So already you're connecting to like what's going on with him emotionally during this.
Hmm.
It's clearly it's a big thing. It's a big moment. It's something impactful to him, and tying it to him directly from the start like that. That's beautiful, man. It's good writing. It's good writing.
Yeah. And it,
Um,
go ahead.
for me, as far as outlining goes, it's interesting because I strive for my writing to feel as cinematic as possible. I want you to feel like you're watching a movie when you're reading my novel. And so, what I ended up doing for my sort of writing style, or my writing format, is I adapted the structure of a script from the Screenwriter's Bible. It's I picked up a copy of the Screenwriter's Bible a few years back and learned what screenwriters do. Because whether it's a 90-minute movie or a 47-minute program on hour-long drama on TV, regardless, there are these beats that they hit, and it tells a tight story. There's very little fluff or fat or things to cut. Like, they cut out anything that's unessential, and they just give you a nice tight story that goes boom, 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 and by the end you're like, whoa, that was amazing. And if they do it right, it's fun, and it's fast paced, and it's fantastic. And that's kind of what I want to emulate in my stories. So I use that story structure, number one, for the novel as a whole. I go, well, in this first act of the novel, that's the setup and the inciting incident that's on there, and I hit all the beats that a screenwriter would hit in that outline. And then, of course, I expand that into a full novel. Well, okay, now this story beat falls into chapter 1, this one falls into chapter 5, and I have to get you from 1 to 5, and there's where the novel comes in. But
Hmm.
ultimately, I'm just trying to hit those story beats like most people. Now, what's interesting is with me, I have multiple point of view characters. I have 3 main characters, and because they're main characters, they each need to have their own storyline, their own story arc, their own journey. And so that outline will inevitably split up into 3 outlines, and those main story beats that I had in the original will find their place in each of the characters. So, maybe the setup is in this character's story, but the big climactic moment is in this character's story over here, and it all ties in. It's all one big story, but you're following 3 separate storylines. And so that's probably why my book is bigger than most, and that's why it takes a long time to write and to keep things straight. I look like one of those crazy theory guys with like the red strings and like this happens and then you go over here, and that's what my outlines look like. It's just madness, but I figure it out.
I just recently, on that, you're talking about looking at plays and screenwriting, and I just a couple of days ago read through Macbeth. It's been years since I've read through it. It was a reference in a book that I had, or something came to my mind, the bubble, toil and trouble line of the witches in Macbeth, and I said, I need to go back and read that again. And I was astonished at how short the play is. Now that I'm writing novels, I think about the complexity of a novel. And I guess Macbeth would probably play in about 2 or 2.5 hours on stage. Depends upon how much action they put in between the lines, because we didn't provide a whole lot of screen direction. But the story was basically very quick. The witches deceive Macbeth into thinking he has greatness in him. And Macbeth goes off to fulfill that greatness, and with the help of Lady Macbeth, they end up doing some very evil things and killing off the current king so that he can become king, and kills off the king's son so that he can become king. And then it doesn't work out for them, and it turns out the witches lied the whole time. Well, they didn't really lie. They told him the truth, but they told him a twisted truth. And when he actually got the truth, he discovered it had a whole lot more to it than they'd known. And Lady Macbeth ends up killing herself, and Macbeth ends up dying in a battle. He thinks he's protected by the things the witches have told him, and it turns out those protections were nothing at all. That the greenwood does come to Dunsinane. And the man who kills him was not of woman born. He was ripped untimely from a woman's womb. And and it just, but
classic Shakespeare.
but what really surprised me, as I say, was how short the play was.
Yeah,
the scenes were not that many.
Yeah, it hits. It flies right through them. You go, this is it, boom, 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 and
right.
Wild. Yeah, and Shakespeare, he undeniably the dude knew what he was doing. So there's something for us to learn from that for sure. Says the guy with the 150,000 word novel. I really gotta work on that. The next one, I fear that the second book will be bigger. I'm trying to keep it the same size. If I don't go past 150K, I will consider that a victory, because I'm doing a lot on this one. It's still a lot going on. What I am trying to do, however, is make the chapters shorter. I'm trying to keep the chapters moving at a clip. This first novel, one of the things that I want to improve upon is the earlier chapters were much longer, because I was really like introducing a lot of stuff and getting people going, and then the middle and later chapters are much shorter because there's a lot of action and things are really happening. I want them all to be nice and short.
So how long are your chapters?
On average, I would say the average is probably about 5,000 words as a chapter. Yeah. And if I can keep them even, I think that's gonna facilitate what I'm trying to accomplish there. If they're all 5,000 words, then they're not gonna feel too big. But if a couple of them are 3,000, a couple of them are 8,000, well, now I got a problem.
Yep. My chapters are typically about 2,500 or 3,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some that were as short as about 1,500, and a few that ran to 3,500. But I actually looked that up, chapter length and what are
Yeah.
average chapter lengths out there, and they vary widely.
Sure.
But that where I ended up is about the target mean of most authors. Then, of course,
25.
James Patterson, who writes chapters that are 800 words. But
That's the reviews of James Patterson is always, you can't put it down because the chapters are so short. You just you just
yeah,
keep
it
going.
just keeps rolling along.
Rolling along. Yeah. Something to learn from every author. I'll tell you what. Something to learn from every author out there. Everybody does it a little different.
Yeah, you can learn from every author. Sometimes you learn what not to do.
Indeed.
Or the things that don't work for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm a strong proponent of stealing from the greats. Every great author ever interviewed. What's your biggest what's it called, advice to a fledgling writer who's trying to do it for the first time? Inevitably, they'll say steal from all your favorite writers. Whatever they do,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to, write fantastical stories like Neil Gaiman, write fantastical stories like Neil Gaiman. In my case, I'm a big fan of American Gods. I love the way that he shows what we all recognize as the real world, and just also shows you there's more. There's something beyond. There's something else going on here, and it doesn't have to feel like you're in the land of Lord of the Rings. It's the world that I know, and yet there's more. There's fantasy, there's magic, there's gods, and I took from that. I learned from that. My magic system is very soft, but that's kind of part of the idea, is that this is the real world that we all know and love, and yet there's more. And I took that from him. The chapter structures, each point of view chapter, each point of view character changing from each chapter to the next. I took that from George Martin, from his A Song of Ice and Fire series. I love turning the page after finishing a chapter and going, oh, a brand chapter. Okay, what's this one going to be about? Like, I love the element of surprise. Like, oh, suddenly I'm somewhere else, and there's something else going on. Like and you're always like discovering it. I love that, so I put that in there too. Steal from the greats, man. Like, you'll find your own style over time.
I tend to do that more frequently. I'll change point of view from scene to scene. I'll put a scene break in.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you got
point of view. And so I may use one point of view for 3 pages within a chapter. The chapter has a theme to it, has some events happening, and I'll look at those events from maybe 3 different characters in the course of 2,500 words. Or I'll run the entire chapter from one point of view. And then when I got on the final editing on Not Like Us, I went back through the entire book and I analyzed how many different points of view I'd used and how much time I'd spent in each of them. And I found out that I had used point of view from a couple of characters that really weren't necessary. I had too many points of view.
Yeah.
And so I went back and rewrote those chapters using one of the other points of view that was common.
That's something that I'm trying to learn from as well, because one common criticism of my first novel is too many point of view characters. And one of the lessons that I took from George Martin, when they ask him, how do you decide who the point of view character is? His answer was, well, whoever in the scene knows the least about what's going on, that's your point of view character.
Ooh, that's an interesting thought.
And I loved that. And but I took it too far. You understand? Like, there's a line. And so I was honestly going to each chapter going, who knows the least about what's going on in this chapter? This person has never had a point of view chapter before. Well, they're gonna have one now, and you're gonna and I went through the trouble of putting this this formerly not point of view character into the driver's seat, and now I got to give them a flesh out their backstory a little bit, give them things to remember, and all of a sudden you have a whole new character for the audience to learn, and all they want is to find out what's going on with the character that they were just reading about. So that is something that I'm reining in a little more. I'm going to stick more to my core cast, but I still love that rule. There's just a line. There's don't go too far with it. But I do love that rule. The character that knows the least about what's going on in the story, that's your main character. So for example, in A Song of Ice and Fire, Aria is a little girl. She's out, in the world trying to survive because her family got murdered off, and she's off on her own. And she is in the lion's den. Basically, she is surrounded by enemies. She's surrounded by high level people that she is having to serve and take care of. These people murdered her family, but she has to hide. She has no idea what's going on. They're talking war strategies. She has no idea what's going on, but the reader does, and the reader is through her eyes learning about what the bigwigs are planning, and the character has no idea what's going on, but you do, and that's an incredible dynamic because you know what danger she's in even more than she does, and that's what I love to play with. You know what I mean? I find that a lot of fun. The character.
I can think of two other examples of that. Two really good examples of that. One is what I mentioned in the other hour, which was Lessa of Pern. In the beginning of the book, she was in exactly that position. She was the heiress of one of the main houses, but nobody knew that, and she was living as a scullery girl. And so she was a scullery girl to the family that had killed off her parents. You might remember that from the beginning of the story. And so so Lessa was hearing the things that she really didn't understand about what was going on in the world. And another example of the same thing is a classic novel, Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury.
Okay, I haven't read it, but a very famous novel, of course.
The Sound and the Fury, I was forced to read it in high school, and I didn't understand it, and I hated it then. I read it again later, and I loved it.
Isn't that the way it goes?
2/3 of the book are told from the point of view of a man who does not understand the world around him. And there's not a complete sentence in the first 2/3 of the book. It just rambles from one topic to another topic. From this, it rambles from one time to another time. Things are jumbled together in this man's mind, and
you have to piece it together. Yeah.
And yet, hidden in all of those are the events of a rape and murder that happened in the small town.
Wow. Wow.
And you, as a reader, are picking it up tidbit by tidbit out of his imperception of the world.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about, because, in A Game of Thrones, early on, there's the scene where young Bran, who's like, I want to say, maybe 5 or something like that. He's very young. He's doing his thing where he's climbing and he's hearing something that he's not familiar with, and he goes to check it out. He looks through the window and he sees 2 grown adults doing what grown adults do, but he's a child. He doesn't understand what he's seeing. He thinks they're wrestling. And so the way that he's describing what's going on, as the reader, you're like, oh no, that's not what's happening.
It's not wrestling.
They're not wrestling. And suddenly you realize what kind of danger he's in. He has no idea, but you do. Again, it's that moment where you piece the context clues together through the eyes of this person who sees things differently than you. You have to find the meaning. That's darn good writing, man.
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff, man.
and I love it when I come across good reading. I keep trying new authors. There's a facility out there. I mentioned it in the last hour. It's the Fussy Librarian. And
Librarian. Okay.
Fussy Librarian, and they will advertise books that are currently free. And so once a week, I get an email from them of, here's a couple of science fiction books, here's a couple of thrillers, here's a couple of historical fiction. Those are the genres that I ask for. And I'll go read the descriptions of them and pick them up. And sometimes they're very good, and sometimes they probably need to come to my writing group and learn some more. But
everybody needs practice.
Everybody needs practice. That's right.
Everybody needs practice.
And I find it fascinating to see the variety of things that I get that way. So,
yeah, for sure. There's the Writers Guild here in Gainesville. I joined them with the intention of joining their critique pods, and unfortunately, they don't have any in a time slot that works for me with my job and my schedule. They're not available when I'm available, and vice versa. So I haven't been able to take advantage of that, but I very much would love to, because especially on this next novel, it would be nice to show up every other week with a chapter and have them go through it and help me out with it. I don't know. I would very much like that. I have critique partners online, though. That's the beauty of the internet, right? We're all
Right.
connected these days, so I'm able to connect with other authors who have a little spare time, and they can read through my stuff and give me their insights. It's a whole thing, though, man. You have to find those folks that are not going to sugarcoat it. They're not just going to tell you, "Yeah, I liked it." And like, well, no, let's dive a little deeper, man. Give me some feedback here. What can I work on? What's working? Well, there's a lot to dig into. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I have 2 online groups that I'm part of.
It's good.
And I have my face-to-face group, and the leader of the face-to-face group passed on last year, and the other members elected me to keep leading it, so I keep it going. And it is, as I mentioned in the last hour, that is a really powerful group for me. It's a group that has 8 or 9, depends upon the size at the time, 8 or 9 people, all of whom are published authors, and we read our work aloud, and we run a cycle that gets as much help in the shortest amount of time with the intent to publish. We decide the readers for the following week, and the 3 people who are going to read send out their chapter in email, and we do a review in email, written review, marking it up in Microsoft Word, and then the author revises the work and comes in the following week ready to read the revised work, and then they get a marked up. We come in with hard copies, and we mark up the hard copies and also discuss the work.
Sounds thorough. Yeah, it sounds like
very thorough. It's very helpful, and at times I walk away from that morning having read something, and I've got comments all over 8 pages worth of text. And I'm smiling and I'm saying, yeah, this chapter really worked. They liked it. I've got lots of good things to fix. And other times I walk away from it with about 3 times as many red marks all over my page. and I'm shaking my head saying, oh man, I really got to rework this one. It didn't work at all. They didn't like it.
Yeah. My sister is my main editor. I send her everything I write first, and she goes through it first. And she's got her degree in creative writing. She's got her own projects that she's worked on, and so I very much respect her opinion. And what I love about how she does it, because I'll send her a Google Doc, which she can then put comments and editing on, and put comments in the margins and all that stuff. And I love her feedback because she has both sides of the brain active at all times. She has the critique part that's going to help me with grammar and sentence structure and flow and all those, technical things. And then she has that reader mentality where she's going to be like, this was a great surprise. Or she writes in her theories of like, oh, I think this is going here. And it's a good way to see what an average reader might be thinking, at this point, they're probably wondering about this particular mystery, or they're probably thinking of theories about this particular character because of this. And it's really nice to be able to have a reference point for what the reader might be thinking, a non-writer, somebody just enjoying the journey, as it were. It's very valuable feedback. I always recommend to folks to try to incorporate a little bit of that in their feedback as well when they're critiquing things, because that's part of it. The reader experience is a big part of it. It's not all about commas and colons.
No, as a matter of fact, I listened to a presentation last year on the different levels of editing, and that particular presenter defined 5 different levels of editing. It goes from punctuation and grammar down at the bottom level up to story structure and themes and how you flow the story, and there are levels in between there. One of the levels is word use and word selection, and then above that is sentence structure and paragraph structure, and we need it all.
It's
I need
good
help.
that you guys read it aloud to each other too, because there's the rhythm is part of it too, the flow. If you clash up against a word, the reader will also likely clash up against that word,
Mhm.
and um, I always recommend to folks when you go into edit, especially if you're editing your own work. Uh, I recommend to folks change the font of the document to something completely different that doesn't even look like the font you originally wrote it in, and
Right.
then read it out loud, because not only will it look different to you, but you'll hear it, and so as you read it, you're gonna find the flow of your words, and you'll feel the moments where the flow is off, and you're like, oh, this, and you can rework that area to better flow with what came before, and all that stuff. There's
You pointed it.
a musical element.
That's why I like the reading aloud.
Yeah,
And when I read aloud, I've got the red pen in my hand because
because you're gonna find stuff as you go.
I am
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
find stuff, and all I need to do is circle that place. I'll come back to it later and actually fix it, but I'll circle it or underline it. Something didn't work right here.
One project that I have up in the works is the audiobook version, and I'm gonna record it myself, and I'm just dreading it because I know that as I record it, I'm gonna find so much to fix as I go along. It's
Uh,
gonna
you,
be it'll be a whole other editing session, you know.
you have a great voice and a great manner for reading it, so
I
it
appreciate
probably
it.
come across very well.
I
Yeah.
hope so. I hope so. I have a little bit of skill when it comes to like doing voices and stuff. I may not be great with accents, but I'm good with voices, and so
Mhm.
I'm going to try to do it myself, because it's one of the things that has always bothered me with certain audiobook narrators that just don't have a lot of range in their voice. If, for example, the Song of Ice and Fire audiobooks, I don't like them at all. They're read by an older gentleman. There's a lot of very young characters. And when he's reading a character where he should sound like an 11-year-old girl, and he sounds like this, I can't. I can't. It takes me right out of it. So that's a challenge for me, as well as doing like the character voices and kind of fluctuating my range up and down depending on who I'm doing. And I'm going to try to make it, like that, make it a nice little production, and hopefully come out with a good product after that. But it's a whole other muscle, reading it out loud and
Mhm.
performing it. But
Yes, it
like I
is.
said, it'll be a whole other editing session. I'm going to find so much to fix.
I've considered doing that, and man, even when I was teaching courses and ran a business doing training courses, a lot of the third-party training world was moving toward online courses.
Hmm.
I knew that my business needed to, but I never could bring myself to go that direction because it just takes so much time.
It is
Record.
very time consuming. Yeah, very much so. I tried my hand at that. My buddy, my business partner, so to speak, he helps me with a lot of stuff, and he had this idea. He's like, hey man, we're gonna do this course. Like everything's courses these days. You can do a whole course on finishing your first draft, and how to get out of your own way and get it done and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And I wrote a whole thing about it, and we made a trip up to Buffalo and set up a nice little studio area, filmed the whole thing, and we were very happy with what we were doing in the moment. And then like he's been editing that stuff for months now, and he's just like, it's not working, man. Like it's just not like it's not great. I'm like, I know, man. Like it's hard. It's not easy to just suddenly pump out something like that. So it's a whole other skill set, man. It's a whole other thing to do. And that's the thing with us indie authors, everybody thinks that we're doing a job. We're doing like 11 jobs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Mhm.
moving parts to this gig, and you have to get good at all of them to be
Exactly
successful.
so.
Like
I'm used to that because I ran a small business. And I basically myself and one employee, and I had 5 hired instructors who would teach courses for me.
Hmm.
And we did as many as 40 courses a year. But still, I mean, you're right. You own a small business like that, and you're not just the business owner. I was the course developer. I was the accountant. I was the janitor. You do it all.
You do it all, indeed. Yeah, man. Yeah, and there's just so much that goes into it, especially publishing novels. There's just so many
Mhm.
sides to it. Doc, we are running out of time, my good friend. Was there anything else at all that you really wanted to cover, maybe didn't get a chance to, maybe something you wanted to talk about that I didn't think to ask, or anything like that before we sign off today?
Well, I realized after we signed off the Writer's Den that I had neglected to plug my website. And if
Oh,
somebody's still with us,
it's on there. It's in the description, but
in the
but
description
yeah,
already. Okay, good.
yeah, yeah.
It's
I
if
got you
somebody's
covered.
still with us, it's dochonorbooks.com. Easy to find.
Hmm.
Make sure you
On,
spell honor the British way.
I was just gonna say, honor the British way. That extra U, very important.
Yep, dochonorbooks.com. And that's where you can plug in with my newsletter and my blog, and also get links to the books. And occasionally from the newsletter, like you do, Adrian, I send out samples of new writing, short
Yes.
stories. Hmm.
Well, thank you again, Doc. This has been a very special treat. I appreciate you being a guest on both. I greatly appreciate you coming on, man. It was a fascinating conversation. I wish that we had more time to go a little longer, but I got to cook dinner for these little knuckleheads that keep coming into the room. They're hungry. That's why they're doing it. They keep walking in like, "You gonna feed me yet?" I'm like, all right, I'm coming. So, thank you again for everybody at home. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting the interview shows over the last 4 years or so, however long I've been doing this. There is so much more to come. I have very big plans for the platform as a whole, for the channel in particular. So stay tuned, subscribe. You should see me back in 2 weeks. And I'll be doing writing sprints every Sunday to finish book 2, as well as some short stories that I'm going to be providing for you guys in between. And I hope you guys all come along for the ride, because it's going to be fun. Doc, thank you again. And to everybody at home, write on, writers, we are out.